Hi, I'm Annabel. I've been part of GT for about 8 years now. I moved to York as a student and now I work for Christians Against Poverty.
I'm Adoniel. I've been part of G2 for 1 year now.
Great.
And I came from Mexico to do a master's in global marketing and stay in York to serve people through G2 York as student team leader.
Great. So this week we're looking at a parable, which is a story which illustrates a bigger idea or a teaching. And this is a parable that Jesus shared with his disciples. It feels quite timely because it's all about workers and fair pay. And I don't know if you paid much attention to the news recently, but there's been a lot of strikes. And so on the face of this is all about that same thing, but there's a bit more to it under the surface. So we're going to start our time today with a bit of a question. Has anyone in your group had a particularly random job? Or, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up? So, we've been thinking about how this story that we're looking at today might have been told today in our context. And we know that the Brits absolutely love to queue, or at least that's Adoniel's best impression. So before we look at the Bible passage together, we're going to tell you a story all about queuing.
So close your eyes, let's transport ourselves. It's a Thursday evening, the day is ending, and every hour feels more like a weekend. All the work for that day is done, and you're excited because today you will cook your favorite dish for tea. It's a special dinner, so you want all the ingredients fresh. You go to Tesco, it's 5 p.m, and the most glorious journey starts. While you walk, you get surprised by big Tesco sizes, pasta and cereal kilo presentation.
Wow.
All sorts of things that only in big Tesco will find. You have all your ingredients,
Okay.
and as you approach the checkout, you see the most significant expression of love and community in humankind. Another reason to believe in humanity.
Wow.
The safest place to chat and know someone for the first time. Simply the biggest joy of England, the queue.
Oh, wow.
There is only one person before you and 3 people with a massive grocery shop queued after you. And as soon as you arrive, that feeling of gratitude knowing that you will have after those customers if you had joined a couple of seconds afters. 1 minute after, 4 other customers join the queue, and that chat starts. People are happy, another achievement to this society. But on the side, you're still thankful for being the second one by a couple of seconds. You've been in the line for a couple of minutes now, and more people keep queuing after you. Now, there are 10 people after you. That seems strange. For some reason, the person in the front is taking ages. Finally, after 15 minutes without progress, the following 10 register lines open, and all the people behind you go to each one of them, but you stay at yours because you have already unloaded your groceries. The people in the other lines are faster, and you see how one by one manage to go out of the shops before you. And at the end, the only thing that you receive is a, hey up, pay by cash or card. So on the screen, in your group, you will see the passage to read today. Read the story out loud together, and as you read it, try to take the perspective of the workers picked first. When you finish discussing your groups, what stood out of you? Did you sympathize with the workers picked first?
So I don't know about you, but I find myself quite sympathetic to the workers who were picked first. I've got quite a strong sense of justice, and so I can really understand that the workers were frustrated that they were paid the same for a full day's work that other people got paid for just being there for an hour. I've got a particular compassion for them because the landowner set up the payment so that they were paid last, and they had to sit and watch as everybody else got paid the same as they did for doing less work.
I also sympathize, to be fair, with the workers who were picked first. I had the opportunity to work in a marketing agency in Mexico, and 1 year we had so many events that we decided to give bonuses to the producers for every event. I was the manager of the production team, So I was involved in their events, supervising setups, pre-production, production, and finances. Plus, I had my own events.
That's a lot.
However, the bonuses I was getting were exactly the same as all of my team because I was getting paid only for mine. Even though I was fully involved with all the others event, it was absolutely tiring.
And I don't think it's just us that gets frustrated. In fact, we're seeing this quite a few times in the Bible, both in the parables that Jesus tells and in the actions of other humans. Think about Jonah. He gets asked to go to Nineveh with a message from God, and he tries really hard not to go, jumping on a boat in the wrong direction, and then relents and eventually does go and give the message because he wants to get out of the belly of a fish. And then when God decides to have grace for Nineveh, when they decide to listen to him, Jonah sulks. And you find out that the whole reason he didn't want to go in the first place was because he was pretty sure that God would be generous and gracious to the people who were there. And he just didn't want that to happen. He didn't think that was right. And then recently we've looked at another parable, which is that of the prodigal son, where the younger son takes half of his father's assets, goes off, spends it all, and then when everything goes wrong, returns. And you see the older son get really annoyed that the father welcomes him back with such generosity and grace. He just doesn't think that's fair.
Another example that came to my mind is Mary and Martha.
Mm-hmm.
The sisters were preparing to receive Jesus and his disciples in their house. And as soon as Jesus arrives, Mary stops working with Martha and sits at Jesus' feet to listen what he was saying. But Martha keeps working and working. And when he realized that Mary was not with her anymore, Martha goes to Jesus and says, "Don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Please tell her to help me."
So I think it's pretty safe to say this is something that we struggle with as humans and that the Bible wants to teach us about. That being said, I don't think the lesson here is that we shouldn't want to see people treated fairly. Justice is good. It's important, something God values highly. And we see this in a few different places in the Old Testament too. So in Deuteronomy, at the start of the Bible, it describes God as the rock. His works are perfect and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. And then in the Psalms, we see it again. It says, "The Lord is righteous. He loves justice." And later on, it says, "The works of his hands are faithful and just. All his precepts are trustworthy. They are established forever and ever, enacted in faithfulness and uprightness. He provided redemption for his people. He ordained his covenant forever. Holy and awesome is his name." And yet, the concept of justice in the Bible is about more than just giving people what they deserve. It includes treating people not only with fairness, but also with protection and with care. The Bible regularly pairs justice with acting righteously and behaving with mercy, love, kindness, and compassion. We see this again in some of the Old Testament prophets, where the people are commanded about how to administer justice. So in Zechariah it says, "Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the foreigner or the poor." And again in Micah, "What does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God." Justice doesn't remove the opportunity for grace and generosity. The workers who came first were treated justly. They received the pay that they'd agreed to, and that was what they were offered at the start of the day. And as far as we know, the pay that they were offered was a fair amount for the work that they'd done. They didn't lose out because other people had received more. This was an injustice. And as we'll see later, this was actually justice paired with compassion and with mercy.
And sometimes as humans, we can jump quickly to frustration and anger, as we can believe we're in a competition with one another and that there is not enough for everyone. But one of the things that Jesus teaches about the kingdom of heaven is that isn't the case. There is enough for everyone, plenty to go around. For example, in John 14:2 it says, "There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If these were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you?"
And then we see it again in a letter that Paul writes to the Corinthians, where he's talking to the church about generosity and about how they give, and he reminds them that he is able to bless us abundantly, so that in all things, all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor, their righteousness endures forever. So, someone else being given more than they deserve doesn't lessen what we receive. And in fact, as we'll come back to later, we're all receiving way more than we deserve anyway. None of us have earned it. So, to help us unpack this a little bit more, let's take some time in the group to read the story out loud together again. But this time as we read it, let's take on the perspective of the workers who were picked last. So when you've finished reading, discuss that together. And have a think about, did that change your perspective? Did that change how you thought or felt about it? I was struck by just how long the workers waited in that marketplace and how that must have felt. Arriving not that long after sunrise and then waiting there as the workers were selected at 6 and then at 9 and then at 12 and then at 3. The workers who were picked first were frustrated that they'd worked the whole day through the heat of the day and the others hadn't, but the others had been stood in the marketplace for that whole time with no promise of work or pay. And I think I'd find that harder. Although we can think it's great that they persevered and they stuck around, it does make you wonder why. Because if you're still there at 5, you've got to be really desperate for that work or really worried about returning home without any pay, because otherwise, why have you stuck around? I'm not sure I would have made it.
Yeah, and to be asked to work at 5 must have been such a blessing to know they will get some pay and to be able to go home with something. Yet they still wouldn't have expected to be paid much. They will still have been a sense of loss of their time wasted not working the rest of the day and the pay lost because of that. And they certainly wouldn't have expected to be paid the same as the others who have been there all day. And something that I wonder is how they felt as they got paid a full day's wages for a smaller amount of work. Did they feel like imposters, or were they worried about what the others will think? Were they able to accept the generosity freely and gratefully as it was given?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And so let's look at what the landowner had to say at the end of the parable. But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give to the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Those of us who have been Christians for a while might read this story and identify with the workers who were chosen first. But this story was told to a group of Jewish men over 2,000 years ago who were the first group of people to follow Jesus. In the context that it was told, the parable was most likely explaining that there was space for everyone in the kingdom of heaven, including even people like us, who at the time wouldn't have been thought of as good enough. And so we are by no means the workers picked first. In fact, if anyone has only shown up for an hour's work when others work for a full day, it's us who have turned up at least 2,000 years late. That's not to say we don't have a place or a role. The whole parable is designed to show that we receive the same undeserved grace as anyone else in the kingdom. But it can help us to remember the bigger story to gain some perspective. We don't want to end up thinking we should come before anyone else because of anything that we've done. In fact, in the kingdom of heaven, that's a really quick way to end up last. Instead, we want to be reminded that we are all here as a result of the same generous, undeserved grace, and that there's more than enough to go around. So we don't need to be annoyed when we see that same generosity shown to others, but instead we want to rejoice with them. So we're going to take a moment to reflect individually on this. And there's a couple of questions that will come up on the screen to reflect on. So, are there people or groups who you sometimes see as last in the kingdom of God? Are there areas where you get frustrated and need a reminder of God's generosity? Let's take a few minutes now to ask God to show us where this might be, to bring those to Him, and to ask Him to remind us of His grace and generosity.
God's perfect justice holds us on the same level to be rewarded. And today's passage also encourages those who sometimes find themselves the last. God's generosity sees us equally in a world where we compare with others to see who is the best or who has more or who is more. Sometimes we feel inadequate when comparing our knowledge or accomplishments with others, but the price is exactly the same for everyone. No matter how young, new, or unqualified we feel, God has a purpose for each of us with different roles, and it will come at different times with other responsibility, but the reward will be the same for everyone. Some people are called since they were in the womb, and others when they were just children to be kings. Some are called while being teenagers or students, but others are called during 30s or 40s or 50s. And some people are called at the end of their lives. One of my favorite passages in the Bible that shows God's perfect generosity and forgiveness is when Jesus was on the cross and the thief was by his side and said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Our value is not on the timing when we are called or how qualified we are. Our value is in God's justice. Therefore, our faith should be in God's justice for us. We are all equal in God's eyes through God's generosity. So, the last question and the last reflection: why don't we think, what are the areas of faith where you feel like the last? And as you think about this, why don't we take a time to pray for each other?